Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Christy, and to the steering committee and to everyone that has worked so hard to put this event together. I have had a great time being in Denver. I have had a lot of events. I'm drinking lots of water, so I don't pass out from the altitude, but that is a real thing. It really is a real thing. If I drop, just throw some water on my face and I'll snap back really quick. But thank you so much for coming out. And I'm really excited about the work that I've heard about coming from this network. Someone told me this morning you guys were the rabble-rousers and that I would be in good company. This is kind of like the choir here, right? So hopefully we can keep it real and have some great conversation. We are videotaping, but you know, let's speak truth to power and make ourselves comfortable in this space to really use this time to reflect, to strategize, to think, to really empower all of our efforts to change this field. I'm going to just begin the session with reading a little something that I wrote. The field of philanthropy is a living anachronism. It is, we are like a stodgy relative wearing clothes that will never come back in fashion. It is adamant that it knows best, holding tight the purse strings. It is stubborn. It fails to get with the times, frustrating the younger folks. It does not care. It is, we are like a mansion with neoclassical columns and manicured lawns, staffed with butlers and maids who pass silver trays of tiny tasteless niblets. Pigs in the blanket, angels on horseback, anyone? To guests wearing tailcoats and bustles as a string quartet plays tunes written centuries ago. No one's voice rises above a certain decibel. No one jokes. No one's words call attention to the ludicrous and unsustainable farce that is the entire scene. It is, we are, a period play, a costume drama, a fantasy of entitlement, altruism, and superiority. Far too often, it creates, we create, division and suffering rather than progress and healing. It is, we are, a sleepwalking sector, white zombies spewing the money of dead white people in the name of charity and benevolence. It is, we are, colonialism in the empire's newest clothes. It is, we are, racism in institutional form. Philanthropy moves at a glacial pace. Epidemics and storms hit. Communities go underwater literally and metaphorically. Black and brown children get shot dead and lose their youth inside jail cells. Families are separated across continents. Women are abused and beaten and raped. All of Rome burns while we fiddle with another survey on strategies, another study on impact. Other sectors feel the heat of competition, not us. We politely nod at the innovations of the business sector. It takes us half a century to implement even one. We indulge those who say that diversity is important by conducting several decades of analysis, hiring consulting groups with absurd price tags. We publish reports. We create a task force and debate mightily over what to call it. We do not actually change, not more than superficially. This is philanthropy. It is, we are the family that embarrasses me, that infuriates me, but it's still my family, my relations, and I believe in redemption. It is from this place of calling this family to a better self that I wrote Decolonizing Wealth, because philanthropy, honey, it is time for an intervention. So in January, I got an award from Inside Philanthropy as the most radical critic of philanthropy, wondering why. I think, I guess I'm thankful for the award. But you know, I think if being radical means talking about love, because after all, philanthropy is love of humankind, right? And speaking the truth of what this sector is and what we could be doing better. If that makes me radical, that I own that label and accept that word with pride. But I want to ask you, are you guys ready to be radical with me for a few minutes? Yeah. Okay, you got me? Yeah. All right, good. Awesome. So where I'm from in North Carolina, I'm a member of the Lumbee tribe in southeastern North Carolina. We are the largest tribe east of the Mississippi River. We have 60,000 members, so quite a few of us there. And when we greet each other, we say, "Who's your people?" Because we inherently believe that we're all connected and related, and in many cases we actually are. So, I want to tell you a little bit about my people today. Yes, I'm Native American. I come from a community that is very invisible, especially in North Carolina. We were the very first point of contact 500 years ago. And so the fact that any strand of anything Native remains in Eastern North Carolina is actually quite a miracle. If you have a chance to visit, if you're driving up 95 from Miami to New York City, our community is located right smack in the middle of that area. So when you visit, you will feel something very spiritual and real, and know that something quite marvelous actually still exists in that community. But for me as a Native American, my identity has been, quite challenged personally, but also by the country because of our history. I come from a group of people that are the only race or ethnicity in this country that has to prove that we are who we say we are. And so I exist in the other box, and that other box is under constant threat and scrutiny. And so as a result of that and the generations of trauma that happened 5 years ago, but also as recent as yesterday, we find ourselves in my home community and Native communities around the country living in some pretty dire conditions and really struggling with lots of trauma. But in our communities, there is such rich wisdom and knowledge, and we share that with an open heart and willingly. And I think that the world is beginning to see more and more, the world is beginning to sort of turn to indigenous communities because folks see the resilience and the sustainability. And I think that wisdom is our way out, and for a lot of things, especially around climate. Folks are on the front lines leading climate change work from indigenous communities, and we have so much that we can learn from our folks. So in my book, I say that money can be medicine. So I want to just talk about that concept for just a minute. What do I mean by that? In indigenous communities, anything can be medicine. If we give it that title, if we say that it is something that's sacred, it makes us feel balanced, it makes us feel good, we can call that medicine. And so, for example, have you ever had a bad day, you're driving home from work and you want to call a girlfriend or someone who makes you laugh on the phone and you kind of shake off the day and you feel better? So that phone call was medicine for you, right? And so for me, it's taken me a long time to really learn that the medicine that has chosen me is actually money. And our elders say that you don't choose the medicine chooses you. And so when I got to a place where I realized, God, I've been in this sector for 15 years now. I'm getting old, and I can't believe I still work in philanthropy. I accepted the fact that it's because the medicine that has chosen me is money. And so I had a conflict with that because I grew up in a way in the South, in a very religious home, very Christian, church 3 times a week. And I remember growing up and hearing this connotation about money, that it was something that was bad. Money was evil, it was dirty, it was something that was, people often say was the root of all evil. And so I felt odd when an elder told me that the medicine that had chosen me was money. But in fact, I ended up going to seminary right out of high school because I wanted to give back. And at that time, the faith community was the only vehicle that I knew. I knew nothing about philanthropy in the nonprofit sector. And if you knew me well now, you would probably kind of laugh at the idea of me going to seminary. But I went. And what I learned in seminary is that we actually misquote that scripture in the Bible that says that money is the root of all evil. What it actually says is that the love of money is the root of all evil. And, in other words, when we place money above people, when we place money above relationships, when we put money above community, therein is the evil. So the case that I'm trying to make in this book is that money, which has historically been used, if I step away, is the mic still on? Okay, good. Money, which has historically been used as something as a weapon, and has resulted in traumatization for a lot of communities through colonization, through stolen land, through genocide. All of these tactics of oppression were all about accumulating wealth. And as a result, there's a lot of trauma that exists in the world. And so can we flip that? If money has been used in the name of evil, can we use money in the name of good to repair the harm that has been done? So a lot of folks in philanthropy, we point an accusing finger to funding priorities, grant-making decisions, the tax code, payout percentages. And I think that we definitely need to reform all of those things. But ultimately, reform of those things are about as effective as rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. Because I think that those types of strategies that we're trying to change in philanthropy are really the symptoms of something that is a little bit more pervasive, something that has, something that has affected every interaction of our being, of our society. What remains unexamined in those frank types of reforms are honest conversations about where the wealth came from, why it's held back from public coffers, how it's invested as an endowment, and who gets to allocate, manage, and spend it. So I don't need to persuade you all that the economy is broken, right? It needs some help. It's not working for everyone. But sometimes I think we point accusing fingers to capitalism and economic models without really looking at the issue that hides behind capitalism. As Malcolm X said, you can't have capitalism without racism. So what if I told you that it's not about some of these, we might be focusing on some of the wrong reforms, or reforms are not quite as radical or transformational. We need to focus not on economic models, but we need to focus on how we can disrupt white supremacy and colonization as it shows up in our institutions. Because you see, you all know this, like you're a part of COFIE, right? Well, you know, when it comes to getting access to money and who gets money, white men are usually in charge and white men are receiving most of that money. Communities of color have to be twice as good to get less than even half of the money. So the stats are in the book, but take it from me, whether we're talking about philanthropy, venture capital, banking, even municipal bonds, all the institutions that control access to wealth and capital in this country are institutions of racism and division if they are not examining themselves and the colonial dynamics that are still at play in our society and really demonstrate themselves when it comes to institutions that move and control money. So what does it mean to decolonize wealth, right? This title scares some people. I've been to a couple of conferences where I hang the banner and people are like, whoa, what's going on there, right? It's not that scary. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about it here. So do you know what decolonize means? Because this is a word that we're throwing out quite a bit. And ever since Black Panther, everyone's like, colonizer. So let's talk about what it really means a little bit. So colonization is really normal to many of us, right? It's in our history books. We learn about colonizers sort of like they're heroes. And absolutely, if you travel to my part of the country where I grew up, folks are really esteemed as heroes in communities. If you travel to Portugal, anyone ever been there? Wow, like just huge statues of folks that were colonizers. So it's actually the strangest thing. We take a lot of pride in colonizers and the history of colonization. I was reading a study in the UK. They recently surveyed residents of the UK and asked them how they felt about the British Empire. You know, at one point, the UK owned 2/3 of the world and was colonizing all over the place. 60% of people in the UK, this was about 2 years ago, I believe, with the survey, 60% of folks in the UK said the world is better off because of colonization. And so the reason that we have not unpacked or fully understand colonization is because most folks actually think it's a good thing, right? But I want to be really clear that colonization is actually an atrocity. It's a close relative to genocide. Conquering is one thing. When you conquer, you go into a community, you kill people, you take the stuff, whatever you're there to do, and then you leave and you go back. Colonization is a little bit different. With colonization, you come into a community, you kill people, you take their stuff, and then you stay. And not only do you stay, you force the existing indigenous people to become you, to think like you, to talk like you. And so it's sort of a bleaching of anything that was there prior to your arrival. And so it is absolutely devastating. And so I talk about in the book this idea of the colonizer virus, because I'm trying to help us understand, you know, we're not pointing fingers today at certain groups of people, but this is how this country was founded, off of colonization. And as a result of that, the dynamics of colonization, which are to exploit, to divide, to conquer, to separate, those types of dynamics still are at play like a virus in our communities, right? That have permeated our policies, our systems. If you look at the public education system, very clearly you see the colonizing virus, right? I mean, it's a very easy example. And so in the book, I focus on institutions like philanthropy that move and control wealth and help to identify the colonizing aspects or how that virus is showing up in our institutions. So in order to decolonize, quite literally, it means that you're undoing colonization. Literally, there are some folks who, you know, want to take it literal. It actually means that land is reinstated to indigenous people, the land that was stolen. Sovereignty is reinstated to indigenous folks that were here. All of the autonomy over land and resources and social structures and tradition is all granted back. So when we start talking about decolonizing in that type of political construct way, we often get stuck because most people think, oh, so do you mean that like all white people should leave? And like, you know, what do we do? Because like I'm married to an Indian person, does that mean we should do? And so I just want to say we get stuck there. The reality is in the 21st century, there is no future that does not entail descendants of colonizers or settlers being in the same community with descendants of indigenous folks, right? So in short, we are all here together. However you got here, we are now here together. And so what we can do when we think about decolonizing is understanding the trauma that has occurred as a result of our history, and understanding that that trauma has impacted not just indigenous people, not just people of color, but all of us in this country, because we have subscribed to an idea that is not real, an idea of white supremacy that is not real. And subscribing to that belief has harmed all of us. And so we have to begin to think about decolonizing. Undoing that means that we need a mind shift. If we look at the trauma that exists, how can we heal from the trauma? So in the second part of the book, I talk about some steps to healing, and I'm just going to run through these really quick, because how many people have read the book? Y'all all right? Okay, who remembers step number 1? When did y'all read it? I should have, pop quiz. I have to look, sometimes I don't remember. The first step is grieve. In grieving, and this is a process that we can take on as individuals, but also organizations, right? So grieving is that we have to stop and feel the hurts that we've endured. So this is not a sexy, fun step in a healing process. And let's be clear, there's 7 steps because my editor made me have 7 steps. This is not a linear, quick and easy process that you can complete like a 30-day diet or whatever, right? And so I often get invited into foundations like, Edgar, come in and help us. Let's talk about this. We want to decolonize. We want to be equitable, quick, easy. What do? We have 1 hour between the grants approval meeting and the finance committee meeting, right? And also we want a quick, easy, feel-good answer and solution. But the truth is, before we get to that place, it has to get ugly. And I don't like to be the person, I mean, I'm a very positive kind of person. But to get to a place where we really have unity in our communities, we are going to have to go to a really dark, ugly place. We're going to have a process of truth and reconciliation where we stop lying about our history, we start teaching the truth in schools, we stop pretending that we as institutions have not had a role in harming communities, because we all have, right? And so grieving is coming to terms and acknowledging the harm that has been done, what the role of that harm has been for us, what role we've played as individuals and as institutions, and beginning to allow the grief of that to work its way through our bodies. The reasons that foundations are not investing in communities of color, the reason that we're not seeing the type of capital flow to close the race-wealth gap, is because folks, 1, don't know the truth of our history or refuse to acknowledge it, and then 2, they're not sorry about it. We are not sorry. Other countries like Canada, not that it's perfect there, Canada had a decade of truth and reconciliation where folks sat around in communities and listened to the stories of indigenous people and heard them out, let them vent and understand the pain. And there's still a lot going on there, but they are further ahead, I would say, in getting to a place of healing because folks have set and acknowledged, and there have been public declarations and acknowledgments from the government that these things actually happen in the country. In the U.S., we have not had an official apology for indigenous folks or for black folks about what has happened in this country. Every single treaty that was made to Native American communities, every single one, not 99%, every single treaty that was made has been broken, right? And so we have to come to terms with that and grieve that and understand that we as philanthropy have been complicit to that history, right? We're rolling out grant-making strategies that are race neutral. You know, when you look at the funding and where it's going, you know, we have $800 billion in the bank. We're moving out about 5 to 7% of that. Only about 7 to 8% of funding goes to communities of color. If we truly appreciated the pain that the history of this country has caused on these communities, we would understand strategies in a little bit different way, and the outcome of our funding will look different. But we as philanthropy have not been sorry. So step number 2 is to apologize. Once you fully step into the pain and understand the grief that has been caused and the trauma that has been caused, if you are human, you will feel terrible and you will want to apologize. If you were raised right, if your mama told you when you do something bad, you should apologize. So apologizing is when we begin to shift a little bit external from our own, kind of dealing with the situation to think about the folks who have been harmed, and we apologize to them. In Canada, it's really interesting. The philanthropic community there has taken advantage of the Truth and Reconciliation decade to find ways that foundations can actually continue that work in communities. One is to sign a proclamation that says, we as funders understand that we have been problematic, and you know, we have been. And we have contributed to this history in ways that have been harmful to communities. Therefore, we take ownership of that. We're sorry, we acknowledge it, and we're going to fund in a different way that respects that history and acknowledges that history. So sorry is not just words, it is about changing your actions. And then to just kind of fast forward through the rest because y'all read the book. Although nobody can remember the first, I'm not gonna, it's okay, it's late in the afternoon after lunch. Listen is really about getting to a place of meeting people in the middle, being open in a circle with the offender and the oppressor to get to a process of healing and toppling this us versus them paradigm. 4 is relate, and this is where we need to bring our whole selves and begin to build authentic relationships. Representation, investing, and repairing. That's all about using all of our resources, all of our money to heal where people are hurting and to stop additional hurt from happening. So this is what I mean when I say that money used as medicine can help us decolonize. I'm going to pause there because I'm really excited to get into conversation with my brother. And then I want to hear from you. I want to take questions from the audience and hear how you might be applying some of this in your work and what thoughts you have. Thank you.